Foreign policy is supposed to be drafted between the president and Congress. But these days, legislation is outsourced. Now, NGOs and think tanks provide policy prescriptions to elected officials who in turn consult with these groups to make any and all policy decisions. One of the most influential of these groups is called the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. According to its mission statement, the CFR sponsors independent task forces that produce reports with both findings and policy prescriptions on the most important foreign policy topics. Well, that sounds harmless enough. But what sort of policy prescriptions can we expect from an organization whose board members have included some of the most influential politicians, establishment journalists, and corporate CEOs from almost every industry? And moreover, how much influence does this organization really have on actual policy implementation? Well, just to give you an idea, this is what Hillary Clinton said to the council on her very first visit as Secretary of State.
We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Wow, what you should be doing, huh? Sounds like the CFR has a lot of pull. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the primary researchers on the group, Lawrence Shoup. His book, Imperial Brain Trust, lays out multiple case studies about the role of the policy group behind the scenes and outlines how the group has shaped some of the most important foreign policy decisions over the last century. I first asked him why the CFR is so different than any other think tank in D.C.
First of all, it's not just a think tank. It's also a membership organization. So it's unique in that sense. So if you look at Brookings or the Heritage Institute or the American Enterprise, the Heritage Foundation or the American Enterprise Institute or any number of other think tanks you might mention, they're think tanks. The Council on Foreign Relations is a think tank, which is it's one of the biggest and oldest and most influential, or I should say the most influential, but it's also a membership organization that has almost 5,000 members, and that membership is, you know, the who's who of the power structure. Since 1976, I looked at the top 80 to 100, I think it's 85 or something, policymakers in the United States, President, Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, and so on. 75% of those were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. 75% of all the top policymakers since 1976 have been members of this one organization. No other, whether it's Brookings Institute or any of the others you might name, have anywhere close to that coverage of top leadership and their members. You could talk about other things. They also have, besides their members, individual members, they also have corporate members. And if you look at the list of their corporate members, you find all the top, you know, multinational, transnational corporations in there. You know, whether it's ExxonMobil, whether it's Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan Chase, whether it's McKinsey, whether it's Shell Oil or Barclays or Deutsche Bank or whatever, they're members of the Council on Foreign Relations corporate membership.
And so what are these massive corporations getting out of it if they're actually financially backing the council?
Oh, well, they're getting advice from the council think tank people. They have fellows. They have something like 100 fellows at the council. You know, there's a pretty big endowment, so its yearly budget is somewhere around $60–70 million. So with that, they buy some top talent, you know, thinkers, philosophers, politicians, so on, and those people advise. So if JP Morgan Chase wants to know about whether they should get into some country, you know, maybe they're already in, maybe, you know, most countries in the world, but maybe they want to add one, some obscure country they don't do much about, they can go and talk to the council's senior fellows that are experts in that particular country and ask whether that looks like a good investment.
You've also said that at least 14 CIA directors have been among its members. How influential do you think the CIA has been on CFR policy recommendations?
Oh, I think that it's part of an overall picture. You know, the CIA doesn't dominate the council. The council brings together, and the other thing I should mention about the council, it's a capitalist class organization. If you look at the leadership, the board of directors, which is the top, you know, people that make the decisions at the council, a good percentage of them are capitalist class. That is, $10 million or more worth of wealth. And if you start naming the names, you see they're even more than that's more than most of them are more than 10 million. David Rockefeller was the chairman for many years, of course, a billionaire, one of the wealthiest families in the history of humanity. Then Peter Peterson took over as the chair, and was Blackstone. He was with Lehman Brothers and did other things. He was Nixon's Secretary of Commerce. And he went into Blackstone and founded it with Steven Schwarzman, and then became a billionaire. Then the current leadership is Robert Rubin and Carla Hills. Rubin, of course, made a lot of money at Goldman Sachs and then went on to Citibank after he was in the Secretary of the Treasury. So that's just the very top leadership. One of the vice chairmen is David Rubenstein, another billionaire with Carlyle, a private equity firm. So we're talking the highest wealth levels in the world here in this organization. So they have a lot of power just in the private market.
But still, for people who are looking at the organization and saying that there's no direct evidence that they actually prescribe policy recommendations that are actually put into effect, can you outline the evidence that you present to back up the theory that the CFR was largely responsible for laying out post-World War II plans for international order, and also today in more recent history, what have they done that has been put into effect?
When the World War II broke out in Europe, the United States wasn't going to be involved, of course, for several more years. But in 1939, when the war broke out in Europe, 12 days, on September 12th, 1939, 12 days after the war broke out, the Council on Foreign Relations was meeting with a Deputy Secretary of State talking about, well, we need to start working on post-World War II plans. So the war was just started 12 days before, and the Council's talking about making plans for the post-war world, and the United States wasn't going to be involved in this war for several years. So they went to the Deputy Secretary of State said, that's fine, why don't you go ahead and do that. Council members, of course, work together, and this guy's a council member. So they went to the Rockefeller Foundation and got $50,000 in 1939. That's quite a bit of money, $50,000, to set up study groups for the post-World War II world order. And they set up 4 study groups. One of them was the economic, another was the political, another was the territorial. And then there was, I think, a war aims was the other one. Anyway, they started doing studies of the world as it existed in that period, 1939, 40, 41. And they determined that if the Axis powers, that is the Germany and Japan, would conquer a certain part of the world, that would be very dangerous to the United States. That's what they wanted to find out, where they needed to draw the line on expansion. Now, Germany already was controlling lots of Europe, especially after it conquered France in June of 1940. But Japan was particularly dangerous because it was expanding into areas that the Council and the U.S. capitalist class, the U.S. ruling, what I call the U.S. ruling class, was looking at as important sources of raw materials and markets, that is Southeast Asia. So they outlined what they called the Grand Area. That is, the Grand Area was the British Empire plus Southeast Asia, plus really the rest of the world except for continental Europe. That was the Grand Area. They outlined this, and we have this in Imperial Brain Trust, the details of this. They outlined a Grand Area, and they said, anytime a country trespasses into the Grand Area, we have to go to war. So Japan, of course, was trespassing into the Grand Area. With its push to Southeast Asia. So the United States got into the war. Now, there's much more complexity than what I can give in, a few minutes. But then they outlined what the New World Order should look like. And it should have something like the IMF, it should have something like the World Bank, and it should have something like the United Nations to integrate a New World Order that the United States would be the dominant power in this New World Order.
I have to jump in here really quickly. Okay,
Yeah,
I have to jump in here really quickly because you mentioned the term New World Order, and there is an alternative community of people who suggest that the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and the Council on Foreign Relations are 3 organizations responsible for pretty much shaping all global policy trends. Are these 3 groups really running the show? What's your assessment of that claim?
I think they are, that's right. My chapter 4 of my new book, which I'm going to be calling Wall Street's Think Tank, I think, outlines the Bilderberger, the Trilateral, the Council, the Council's International Advisory Board, as these a transnational capitalist class that does pretty much run things. Now, the Bilderberger and the Trilateral are qualitatively different than the Council because the Bilderberger meets once a year. So obviously they're not planning day-to-day policy. The Trilateral has a yearly conference and they do other activities in between that time, but they're nothing like the Council. The Council is the root of the Bilderberger.
How dangerous is it to have shadow organizations enacting government policies outside the democratic process? And is there anything that we can do as regular citizens to ensure that these organizations are held accountable and more transparent?
Well, that's an excellent question, and certainly the question is yes, it's very dangerous for democracy, and I think we have a hollowed out democracy. It's not a real democracy. It's democracy of the plutocracy, and the Council is one aspect. There's a lot of other aspects, the media, the funding of the candidates, etc. So what we can do as individuals is first become aware of this. Secondly, join alternative political parties. The main political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are under the aegis of the Council on Foreign Relations. They're really, largely controlled. People have to get active. They can't be apathetic. They have to understand these various things and start organizing alternative politics and direct action as well against the powers that be.
That's it for tonight, you guys. Join us again tomorrow to break the set.